Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're diving into some absolutely fascinating and honestly incredibly timely research straight out of Stanford and MIT. We're looking at the absolute bleeding edge of artificial intelligence in healthcare. Now, we are really standing at a crossroads here. On one hand, you have this immense promise, right? The idea of training large language models on millions of sensitive medical records to completely revolutionize diagnostics and patient care. But on the flip side, we face the very real peril that these exact same AI models might accidentally leak our most deeply personal, sensitive information.
Which brings us to a pretty wild, maybe even a little scary, question. Can an AI actually memorize your most sensitive medical secrets? Just think about that for a second. In our modern digitized healthcare reality, every single encounter you have with a doctor, every little symptom you describe, every diagnosis you get, it's all meticulously typed into an electronic health record. So what happens when those thousands of words are fed into a massive AI? Does it just learn general medicine, or does it actually remember that it was you, specifically sitting in that exact exam room?
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the promise and privacy risks. Then we'll get into redefining the threat model. After that, we'll walk through the graded access framework, uncover some surprising leakage results, break down boilerplate versus real harm, and finally wrap up with the future of medical AI.
Now, before we get into the hard data, let's just ground ourselves in what's actually at stake. We're talking about protected health information, or PHI. This isn't just some big bucket of anonymous data. It is any health information that is explicitly linked to a specific person. In the US, this stuff is heavily shielded by laws like HIPAA, and for a very good reason. Unauthorized disclosure of PHI doesn't just cause, a little embarrassment. It can lead to severe, real-world harms. We're talking everything from insurance and employment discrimination all the way to interpersonal violence. So yeah, the stakes literally couldn't be higher.
Section 1. Promise and privacy risks.
So you might be wondering, why do we even take the risk of training AI on medical notes in the first place? Well, the promise is absolutely massive. When an AI reads millions of clinical notes, it captures real-world, messy, actual treatment practices, stuff that simply doesn't exist on general internet data. It learns to support doctors by summarizing complex patient histories and helping make clinical decisions. But there is a huge inherent risk here, and it actually stems from a super common habit in the medical field called copy forwarding. Think about it. Doctors are incredibly busy. To save time, they'll frequently copy content from a patient's older note and paste it right into the new one. This means the AI isn't just reading your private info once, it's exposed to the exact same sensitive sequences over and over again across multiple visits. And as we know from how machine learning works, duplicated sequences are highly likely to be memorized verbatim by the model.
Section 2. Redefining the threat model.
Now, researchers have known for a while that AI models can memorize data, but historically, the privacy tests used in the medical field relied on a totally unrealistic standard. Basically, the old privacy tests assumed that a hacker already possessed half of a patient's clinical note, and then they'd test if the AI could guess the rest. But let's be real here. If an attacker already has half of your medical chart, your privacy is already deeply compromised, right? So the researchers behind this study realized we desperately needed a new, realistic threat model. They designed a framework that assumes the attacker starts with almost nothing, maybe just some basic demographic info or metadata, and then they test exactly what the AI will leak from there.
Section 3. The Graded Access Framework.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how they tested that realistic threat model. They essentially mapped out an escalation arc. On the far left, you'll see they start with over 370,000 actual clinical notes from a massive database. Then, moving into the middle, they carefully construct prompts for the AI. They kick things off with just basic background information, stuff anyone could easily guess or scrape from public records. And then step by step, they slowly add highly specific details, testing the AI's response at every single stage. Finally, over on the right, they measure two totally distinct outcomes. First, did the AI spit out an exact verbatim copy of the private clinical note? And second, perhaps even more importantly, did it semantically reveal a sensitive diagnosis without using the exact same words?
So the researchers tested the AI in 4 escalating tiers. Tier 1 is just public info: age, gender, marital status, stuff you might literally find on someone's social media. Tier 2 adds known medications, maybe something a close family member would know about. But Tier 3 is where it starts to get genuinely scary. This is encounter info. We're talking just a patient's name, their date of birth, their doctor's name, and the date of their last visit. This is exactly the kind of harmless-looking metadata sitting on a family calendar right now, or maybe popping up in an appointment reminder text message. Finally, Tier 4 is the worst-case scenario. where an attacker actually has a leaked fragment of the note itself, like the chief complaint.
Section 4. Surprising leakage results.
Okay, so the researchers trained an actual medical language model on 1 billion tokens, which is basically just chunks of text, of clinical notes. What happens when they push the model through those tiers we just talked about? Well, 85.6%. I really want that number to sink in for a second. When the researchers tested the model using the highest level of prior knowledge, meaning giving the AI the encounter info and the history of the present illness, an astonishing 85.6% of the AI's generated response was an exact verbatim copy-paste of the patient's actual medical record. The model didn't just learn medicine, it literally memorized the patient's.
But here's the kicker. You don't even need that highest level of access to see terrifying results. Take a look at the orange bar and notice that massive jump. The blue, yellow, and green bars show us that if an attacker just has public info or a list of medications, memorization stays relatively low, hovering under 16%. But the moment you add encounter info, again, that simple, everyday appointment reminder data we talked about, verbatim memorization spikes all the way to over 60%. Just knowing when and where you saw the doctor acts as a key that completely unlocks your medical history right out of the AI's memory. And as the researchers so astutely point out, an exact match text isn't the only danger here. We really have to look at verbatim memorization versus semantic leakage. Verbatim is exactly what it sounds like. The model acts like a photocopier. But semantic leakage? That is much more insidious. This is when the AI spills your sensitive secrets using completely different words. It might not say patient has X condition exactly the way your doctor typed it, but it might subtly paraphrase your history. Or it might list a highly specific combination of symptoms and medications that indirectly yet undeniably discloses your private diagnosis to anyone reading the output.
To actually measure this semantic leakage, researchers put the model to the test against some highly sensitive diagnoses. Now, the AUROC score you see here essentially measures the AI's accuracy, where a score near 0.5 is effectively just a random coin toss. With only public info, the AI is essentially just guessing at chance levels. But look closely at the encounter info prior column. The accuracy leaps dramatically. For a history of abortion, the accuracy jumps from a coin toss of 0.51 to near absolute certainty at 0.91. For HIV, it jumps from 0.56 up to 0.81. The model is effectively outing the patient's most sensitive health data simply because it was prompted with a basic appointment time. Crazy, right?
Section 5. Boilerplate versus real harm.
At this point, I know the alarm bells are probably ringing pretty loudly. But this research contains a crucial twist. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that not all memorization is a privacy disaster. When the researchers analyzed the exact words the AI was spitting out under that encounter info prompt, they found that 36% of the memorized text was actually just templated boilerplate. The other 64% was clinically revealing. What this means is that treating all AI text matching as some catastrophic privacy breach is actually a pretty big oversimplification.
To really understand what that boilerplate looks like, notice how the memorization breaks down by the different sections of a clinical note. Check out the first bar on the left, the review of systems. Guide your eye to those massive blue chunks. That blue represents templated text. So when a doctor writes negative for chest pain or negative for shortness of breath, that is standard medical formatting duplicated across thousands and thousands of different patients. Memorizing that doesn't reveal your unique secrets. But look at the second bar, the history of present illness. This is the highly specific narrative of exactly why a patient is suffering today. And notice that bar is almost entirely orange, meaning it is profoundly patient-specific and very clinically revealing.
So the big takeaway here is that text overlap doesn't always equal harm. If an AI perfectly memorizes the phrase negative for chest pain, the privacy risk is incredibly low. But if it memorizes the unique narrative of your present illness, the risk is incredibly high. In fact, the study found that 4.9% of the so-called memorized regions appeared in more than 8,000 distinct patients. That's just the AI learning the grammatical structure of medical jargon, not committing a privacy violation. We absolutely have to differentiate between harmless repetition and genuine privacy harm.
However, we definitely cannot let our guard down. While text shared across thousands of patients is totally safe, the data presented here highlights a severe danger. This chart looks exclusively at those orange, clinically revealing patient-specific chunks of text. Notice how the data spreads out horizontally? This visually reveals that within a single patient's timeline, their sensitive data is being duplicated across multiple notes. Remember that copy forwarding habit we discussed at the beginning? Doctors repeatedly pasting your history into your new clinical notes over months or even years actively amplifies the exact sensitive data the AI needs to memorize your unique clinical narrative.
Section 6. The future of medical AI.
So, we've seen the mechanics of the memorization, the realistic threat model, and the nuance of what actually constitutes a privacy leak. Where does that leave us as we integrate AI into healthcare? Well, the crucial point is summarized perfectly by the researchers themselves. Risk depends not only on whether a model reproduces training text, but on the specific information revealed and whether the disclosure can be linked to a specific individual. So it is an argument against blind panic for sure, but it's also a strong argument for highly contextual, rigorous privacy audits. We can't just run simple copy-paste detectors on these models. We have to evaluate them based on what a realistic attacker could actually uncover in the real world.
We are building the future of medicine on the backs of these immensely powerful language models, and there's no doubt they will save lives and make our healthcare systems wildly more efficient. But as this study so powerfully demonstrates, the safety of our most intimate data hangs in the balance. So I'll leave you with this. If a simple appointment time sitting on your kitchen calendar can unlock your most sensitive medical history from an AI's memory, how will we secure the AI-driven hospitals of tomorrow? That is the ultimate challenge our researchers, doctors, and engineers have to solve next. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this leaves you with plenty to think about.